Today, we are diving into one of the Bible's most challenging books, the prophet Ezekiel. And trust me, it's a wild ride, full of crazy visions, really stark warnings, and some of the most bizarre prophetic performance art you can possibly imagine. Right off the bat, the book of Ezekiel doesn't ease you in. Nope, it opens with this: a whirlwind, a massive cloud, flashing fire. This isn't just a vision, it's one of the most intense, otherworldly openings in all of ancient literature. It definitely sets the stage for everything that's about to follow. So who was the guy at the center of this cosmic storm? Well, Ezekiel was a priest, but he wasn't serving in the grand temple in Jerusalem like he was trained to. Instead, he was in exile, living with his fellow captives over in Babylon, hundreds of miles from home. His prophetic call, which happened around 593 BC, came at this incredibly critical moment in history. He's part of that first wave of people dragged off to Babylon, and it's just a few years before the final total destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, a disaster he was told he had to predict. Now, that first vision, it included these four really strange living creatures. They had faces of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, almost like they represented the whole of creation. And get this imagery was so powerful that later on, Christian tradition famously linked each one of these creatures to one of the four gospel writers. Okay, so after that absolutely mind-bending vision, God basically gets right down to business. He gives Ezekiel a very specific and, let's be honest, an incredibly difficult job. He's supposed to be a watchman, and his job is to deliver a really heavy warning. Yeah, he was not being sent on some kind of pleasure cruise. His whole mission was to go and confront a people that God himself calls rebels, impudent and stubborn children. You just know this is not going to be an easy crowd. God defined Ezekiel's job with this really powerful image of a watchman. See, his job wasn't to force people to change. It was just to stand on the wall and sound the alarm. He was only responsible for delivering the warning. What they did with that warning, that wasn't on him. And this moment, this is one of my favorites because it perfectly captures the paradox of his whole mission. He's told to eat a scroll, and it's filled with a bitter message of judgment and doom, but when he eats it, it tastes as sweet as honey. The insight here is just so powerful. God's warning, no matter how harsh it sounds, is actually an act of mercy. It's a sweet chance for people to turn back. But Ezekiel didn't just say his prophecies. Oh no, he performed them. He literally became a piece of living theater, using his own body and actions to create these unforgettable object lessons for everyone around him. This is where it gets really weird. So first, he acts out the upcoming siege of Jerusalem. I mean, can you imagine seeing this? Your neighbor is outside building a little model of your beloved city, and then he starts laying siege to it with tiny battering rams. It was this silent, grim forecast of the very real destruction that was just around the corner. And then came the haircut. For a priest, this was truly a shocking thing to do. He shaves his head and beard, a huge sign of mourning, and then he divides up the hair. Each pile stood for a terrible fate waiting for the people back in Jerusalem: death by plague and fire, death by the sword, and being scattered to the wind in exile. But, and this is a really important but, even in this incredibly grim performance, there was this tiny sliver of hope. He tucked just a few strands of hair into his robe. It was a small but powerful symbol that a remnant, a small group of survivors, would be preserved by God through it all. So these dramatic warnings were obviously a huge part of Ezekiel's message, but they weren't the whole story. He also delivered this incredible message of hope that kind of shifted the focus entirely to this radical new idea of individual responsibility. God told him to go and challenge this popular saying that was going around. It was basically an excuse. People were using it to blame all their problems on the sins of their parents and grandparents. Saying, hey, it's not our fault. But Ezekiel brings this message that was just revolutionary for its time. You are responsible for you. Your parents' goodness can't save you, and their sins won't condemn you. Every single person stands on their own, accountable for their own choices. And this leads to the absolute core of his message of hope. God promised something huge, a spiritual heart transplant. He said he would take out their rebellious, hard, stony heart and replace it with a new, receptive heart of flesh, putting a new spirit inside them so they could finally follow him. Okay, so this brings us to the biggest challenge when you're reading Ezekiel. For centuries, people have wrestled with his rich, complex, and, let's face it, bizarre symbolism. And it all leads to this fundamental question about how we're even supposed to read his visions. And this is the key question that really divides interpreters even today. Are we supposed to read these prophecies about future temples and epic battles as literal physical predictions, or are they all symbolic pictures of some deeper spiritual reality? What's really helpful here is seeing the two main ways people look at it. If you take a literal approach, you're expecting a physical temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem someday. But if you take a figurative approach, you see the temple as a metaphor, maybe for the church or even for the heart of a believer. And depending on which path you take, you come away with a very different understanding of the book. But through all the visions, all the performance art, and all the promises, there is one single phrase that just echoes again and again and again. A staggering 63 times, to be exact. This was the ultimate points of everything Ezekiel said and did. The whole goal of both the harsh judgments and the incredible promises was exactly the same, that the people and the whole world would finally understand who God really is. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, right? Ezekiel used these bizarre attention-grabbing methods to cut through all the noise of his culture. So it makes you wonder, what important messages might we be overlooking today just because they come in an unexpected or maybe even a strange package?